Now, 1 foot off center.
And now it's all gonna blow your mind.
I'm Rick Maddison, 1 foot off center with my good friend Scott Lanigan, Jeff Cox, Mattiussi. We are 1 foot off center, which means both sides of the spectrum will be spoken about, and I'm sure you are going to figure out who that is in moments. I am very sure about that. This program is brought to you by Soil to Sod. If you've ever driven by a place and said, wow, that's really nice landscaping, Soil to Sod probably did it. They work with residential, they work with builders. They did my place. Don't let that, because you got to maintain it after they do that. That's for sure. But good people down at Soil to Sod. Pat, who runs the place, he can look at a bush or a plant and say exactly what that is. I think that's useless knowledge, but it's good for a guy like Pat because he's in the landscaping business. So Ron is not in the market because Ron is in a tower, but you probably have some plants in there.
Killed them.
Pat couldn't even tell what they were.
Anyway, our good friends down at Soil to Sod have sponsored 1 foot off center, and we thank them very much. Okay, so let's dive into this. It was a huge news story that came around about the fact that they were doing a spring clean on the encampment next to the rail trail. And I don't know how many people were affected. I know that they had backhoes and a source, like they were lifting and building and pulling the superstructures out of there. And there's one side of the populace that was saying, hey, this is wrong, we should leave them be, they're not doing anything. And the other side says, this is unlawful and we need to start moving ahead on an initiative to figure out a new plan going forward. How do we feel, and I'm going to start with you, Mr. Lanigan, because you were the former chair of Journey Home. Where did you land on when you heard that news story come out?
Well, the first thing I thought about is where are these individuals going to go? That was the very first thing that came to my mind, because it's fine to say, hey, we don't like tent city or any city, no matter what jurisdiction you're in, but here in Kelowna, but there has to be a viable alternative. And unfortunately in Kelowna, we don't have a viable alternative for these individuals. So now it's dispersed. And even yesterday, we were walking downtown as a family, and we saw an increase in, some of the homeless community and around. And I'm like, well, this is directly correlated to what happened just a few days ago. And it's really, I understand that you want to have a rail trail that's viable for folks that want to ride bikes, and I get that. It's important. That's why it was built. That's the intention. Unfortunately, there's a portion of it that was taken over by individuals that, for many, didn't have viable alternatives for them, and so they created a community. And what happens is, especially in the homeless community, any community, we have our people that are like-minded and like us, and so they start forming a community, and they find safety in community. So I think sometimes we look at it from a face value when it comes to the homeless population to go, well, that's just not appropriate. It's drugs, it's paraphernalia, it's crime, it's all those things, which very well might be true, but we forget to realize they are human beings, and they somehow, some way have found community there. And now we're not only ripping apart a place that for many would be an eyesore and trying to respond to solutions of criminality, etc. You're taking a community part, and now you've taken another element away for these individuals to find possibility of moving forward in recovery. And it is not a simple solution as removing this or adding that. It is so complex. But again, I think we tend to have this quick jerk reaction to doing these things, as opposed to ones that are informed, data informed, as well as informed from a holistic standpoint in our community. And so I'm never a big fan of that, but I understand the stress around it.
Okay. So would you do it?
I think I would not do that. I think the only way you do that is if you have options and alternatives for housing and supports. You have to.
Okay.
Because then, to me, I think it's a naive approach to take it that way.
Okay. Mr. Cox, I'm curious to see where you land on this.
Oh, it's so complex. To be sincere, I don't disagree with you. Listen, I've done work at the street level. I understand recovery. This is a catch basin for a group in society that we have totally alienated. Fetal alcohol syndrome prevalent, abuse at a level that I sure don't understand. Mental disorder, probably one of the bigger ones. Some of it drug-induced, some of it not. I know this because I grew up here, and I know people that I grew up with that had no fighting chance to make it, and I see them on the street. And that is a failure from a society standpoint. So I agree with you. But I am to a point. Now, we have got to fix it, and you're right. I'm now very similar to... I'm not going to do that comparison. This is now going to take a generation to fix.
It is.
It's not. This is not. We have got to stop talking about this. Like if we just change the municipal government, it's going to be cleaned up in 6 months. We are now in serious trouble as Canadians, and this is going to take a serious leader with a serious path forward. The struggle I have with the homeless encampment that exists is, despite all the things that I just said, and I have. Listen, if you've not worked at that level, and you don't understand that there is a community that exists there, they lend each other money.
That's right.
The way they survive would be mind blowing when you get down and understand it, and they actually do a very good job looking out for each other. But it's also fraught with arguably human trafficking. It's fraught with significant crime. It is a haven for drug distribution. They keep people addicted. There is a hierarchy there that is run by criminals. I mean, there are a million other reasons that it should be dismantled. I think the challenge is that taxpayers' hard-earned goods are piled down there in masses, and we know that because people have gone down there. So, Scott, I fully agree with you. But I don't think leaving people in that state is also good. I do not know today, other than I will state that what we talked about in the last podcast. I actually think the funding is there, but I think it's got to shift. It's got to shift from wet houses, and it's got to shift to detox facilities and dry centers. I think we've got to start figuring out, multiple. Listen, there are a number of ways to get sober. It is not just anonymous programs. There have been moves that for people that can't go that route. But the reality is we have got to start talking about abstinence options, and that's where it has to start. And we've got to start giving people the ability to, if they get caught doing a criminal act, to make a decision to get sober and stay sober in an abstinence-based facility or go to jail. What we're doing does not work. I can't support a business downtown anymore. We're almost at a stage, like, it was not last week because I was in Toronto. It was the week before, and I emailed you. I emailed all you guys. Like, that week was the worst I've seen in memorable history. Wednesday, for sure, checks went out, and by Friday, it was The Walking Dead. I'm getting calls at 7 o'clock to come down to help people get in our building because people are in a state of psychosis and blocking the doors and screaming and yelling, and people are concerned they're going to get hurt. As a small business owner, I can't do that. No. And that is not the first time, and it won't be the last time, and it's a regular occurrence. And that goes through my life. I agree with you. There is no simple solution here, but the reality is, as people that are trying to move society forward, I'm also at my wit's end. And so it's easy to get short on it. It's complex. I don't know the answer, but keeping people in tents is also not the answer. No. And that's where we got to make some changes.
So Ron, when you were city manager, you had there was a time when we had tents along the sidewalk, and there was a cleanup. And I think it was based around the fact that there's some issues with, there was unsanitary conditions that were existing downtown. So you, combined with, bylaw and police and everything else, you went down there and just said, okay, we're just going to clean this up because it's becoming a fire hazard. It's becoming a petri dish. And I remember that. I remember a lot of people spoke out about that, said, hey, we're removing these people, where are they going to go? And then, so I think that was during your term that I saw that happen. Is this part and parcel with that, or is that like that?
That was a little different time and place. The numbers weren't here. I mean, I observed in my time as city manager over a 5-year period, statistics where bylaw enforcement broke up, 1 year 25 camps, next year 75. By the time I stopped counting, it was up to 300-400. Okay, so we're seeing what you're talking about is some people trying to set up a camp, and we would just tear it down. Just no. There's room at the Gospel Mission. There is room around. Pick up the phone. If there's space available, you'll have to go there. We're not going to let you camp out on the sidewalk. There are facilities. There's things to do, and of course, we took a little harder stand that it's not the role of the local government to be dealing with mental health and drug addictions. Other governments have the money to deal with it. We take property taxes. We just didn't think that we should be using that money to deal with a problem that comes from everywhere. So different philosophy. I agree. With certainly we're never that far apart on this issue. I just think we keep adding. The roof's leaking, and we're adding buckets, and we're not fixing the roof. That's what we're doing. We're just buying more expensive, bigger buckets to catch the rain rather than get on the roof. And I happen to, I'm not a professional, not a health professional, not a mental health drug. I don't live in that world. I don't know much about it other than I've had to deal with the repercussions of failed policy for almost the whole time I've been in BC. And I just believe that having people live in any tent, whether it's a nice brand new tent or one, is a big problem for society. I think these people that are trying to eke out this living, as Jeff said, they're preyed upon. So it clearly is a community, right? It is a real community, and that's the difficult part. But I think we have to find some form of treatment, whether it's voluntary or involuntary, and that's where I'm not sure I agree with everybody out there, but I think governments are getting to the point where we're going to have to say having people sleep on the streets in winter is not what a just society, what a fair society does. So how do you treat them? Well, we could disagree on that, whether it's abstinence or some way to break them into treatment by allowing them some form of drug, whatever it is. But I think people have to get treatment. I think we could deal with homelessness. We could deal with economically homeless people. We could build houses, right? We could house them. But there's an element on our streets that are not going to be housed in conventional housing or conventional type homes with well-meaning volunteers.
10% is statistically there. I mean, it's 10. Yeah. It's 10%,
and that's the group we deal with. Right?
And that's right. And the question is how. This is the debate of how. And my only not argument. I mean, again, you and I are very aligned on this. I mean, I just don't believe handing out illicit drugs is helping the situation. Like, I think there's a bunch of things we've done in the last 10 years that is fueled the fire. And I think you can look. To your point about Ezra's book about abundance is phenomenal, but you can also look to those states and the states that have taken progressive and now retreating from it, but progressive stances on drugs and the way it should be treated are all having a retreat because it hasn't worked, and it's not working in British Columbia. We're not saving lives. That's very clear. Most of the safe supply is ending up in high schools. That's also been extremely proven at many levels. It's not working. There are some fundamental things we need to just make a decision that we're not doing this anymore, and then start talking about how we solve the problem. And that's still a debate.
And over to you, Scott. You did data, and of course we're going back a little bit, but you were doing a very good job as Journey Home to collect the data. And further to Ron's point, it seemed to keep escalating. But are we talking about 300 or 400 people?
There's something called a point in time or pit count, and that would be where individuals go out and at that moment of time they would, kind of interview people if they're homeless or not and how long they've been there, and they would have those pit counts that would average between 200 and 300 in Kelowna over the course of years, and it would escalate in different times of year, et cetera, as people know. The thing that our data was the most frustrating for us to gather data was around the bureaucratic nature of grabbing information, especially from a Confidentiality and Personal Information Act accord. So we spent years we had to work through MOUs with different organizations to be able to just share data. So we would be in a call, you'd have different sectors represented from, they'd be the front lines to the housing to, recovery or addictions or mental health. And we could meet as groups to talk about particular circumstances within our community, but we couldn't share names. And so, Ron's organization might have a gentleman he knows by Joe, and he might have an addiction to heroin, and you might have an individual that, has 3 kids and used to be living in Boston, and I might have an individual I know that has a mental health issue. We might be talking about the same individual. We don't know. We're not allowed to share that data. So now, we had to work through 2 or 3 years just to get working agreement that says, hey, we can share this information. There was no incentive for these organizations to do so. And on top of that, most of the organizations are fighting for the same government grants. And so now there's no, Jeff's organization might do a better job at street level care than mine, but I've got 2 employees and I'm just a small not-for-profit. Well, I'm not going to fire my 2 guys. You're going to fire your 2 guys? No way. So now we don't, so we're not actually having a mindful conversation around how do we best provide solutions. And until that's solved, to your point, it's just not going to be. It's going to be the same issue. And you talk to an organization like the Child Advocacy Center in town, who are dealing with significant issues of sexual victimization and trauma of children, and so much of the data points to the fact that without taking a look at overcoming those type of traumas at that young age, you just watch that dotted line as they grow older and it's not responded to or taken care of, and in a high percentage those folks end up on the street. And so it
was over 20 years I asked the simple question, who's on the street and where do they come from? The city manager was piqued my curiosity. Never got the information. Was told you couldn't get the information. It's private. Again, and so for me, and I'm looking at tax dollars and what I spend it on, are these Kelowna residents falling on a hard time, or am I treating every guy between St. John's and Newfoundland and Victoria that happens to come through because it's nice in BC?
But and I'm going to use an example because I can give you an exact case. So and this is bureaucracy does not always fall in creating policy procedure around money. Like this is a bureaucratic issue. So I know someone that I grew up with, schizophrenic, late in life, end up in the street. Ended up in the street and schizophrenic, involved in drugs, that leads to crime. Like you can follow the path. Okay. If and again, a little bit of your the similar but different. So if he could have been held when he was in a schizophrenic state and treated correctly, the domino doesn't happen. But our laws today say unless there is a substantive risk of suicide, you've got him for 24 hours and then he's got to go. At some point we got to change the way we approach this, because that 15 years ago, that gentleman very possibly could have been treated if we had the ability to do so, and he wouldn't be where he is today. But 15 years later, I still have to follow his story through friends and family and say, hey, anybody heard from, right? That's the bureaucracy that's got to change. Not we're talking about people living in tents in the middle of January, and we're not sharing their names with groups that most, I'm sure 100% of them are looking out for the best interest of these people. That is the insanity that has to stop immediately.
This is a deeper conversation, a longer podcast, but unfortunately, we should probably shut her down there. I did want to go to another area, but instead we'll stop it there. Scott Lanigan, thank you again. Jeff Cox, thank you again. Mr. Mattiussi, appreciate the time. We are 1 Foot Off Center, brought to you by the good folks down at Soil to Sod.
Oh, I've heard about those guys.
They're really quite good.
Yeah.
And it's they'll take a yard and they'll just recreate it. And what's crazy is, here's what happened, true story. Pat Canadian says, here's a plant I'm going to plant here because you know why? The deer don't like it. Do you know how he knew that?
That's gold.
Because he runs Soil to Sod.
That's right, it's gold.
Okay.
That's great.
1 Foot Off Center, thanks so much for watching, and hopefully we'll see you again.